Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are stepping into the wildly imaginative world of unlikely heroes. We're going to examine the nuts and bolts of problem solving and survival, but through a pretty unique lens. We're looking at the trials, the tribulations, and the ultimate triumphs of some genuinely tiny characters who managed to leave a seriously outsized mark on their environments.
Okay, let's dive right into this. What do a tiny snail, a walking stick, and a clever little mouse all have in common? I mean, on the surface, they're just small, seemingly defenseless creatures trying to navigate some pretty dangerous worlds. But as we'll see, they all share this remarkable capacity to leverage their very unique traits to overcome massive obstacles. They essentially prove that you absolutely do not need to be the biggest guy in the room to orchestrate the most massive impacts.
So, here's how we're breaking down our anthology today. First up, a snail saves the whale, followed by Stickman mistaken for a twig. After that, we'll look at Zog's quest for a star, a cunning plan for Superworm, and finally, the big bad mouse Shadow.
All right, Section 1. A snail saves the whale. The power of a silvery trail.
So picture this. The scene opens with the ringing of a school bell, pulling all the kids inside from their play. We are instantly introduced to this super rigid environment. The teacher is standing there holding her chalk, strictly telling the class to sit straight and absolutely not to talk. But this highly controlled environment, which is perfectly represented by a chalkboard as black as soot, is suddenly disrupted. A tiny little snail, who is described as having an itchy foot, decides to intervene. Despite its literally minuscule size, the snail takes action right there on that soot-black board.
And the message the snail leaves behind in its silvery trail is so simple but incredibly profound. Save the whale. The impact of this tiny action is immediate. It's visceral. The source actually notes that upon seeing this trail, the incredibly strict teacher turns completely pale. It's just a perfect illustration of how one tiny, perfectly placed piece of communication can completely shatter the routine of a rigid environment and command instant attention.
And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible chain reaction set off by our tiny hero. The snail's trail gets the children to completely abandon their rigid school rules and just run for help. This instantly mobilizes the local firemen, who literally dig a pool and start squirting and spraying water to keep the stranded whale cool. Think about it. The snail couldn't physically move the whale, right? But it could communicate the problem to the people who could. It's basically a masterclass in using whatever resources you have to mobilize a massive rescue effort.
Moving on to Section 2. Stickman mistaken for a twig, an identity crisis.
Here we find Stickman. He's swimming on, drifting further and further away from his family tree. But his real struggle isn't just the physical distance. It's the constant, agonizing, mistaken identity he has to face. The environment utterly refuses to recognize his autonomy. To the whole world around him, he is totally stripped of his identity. I mean, he's even horrifyingly confused for a poo stick by passers-by. Just imagine the frustration of trying to navigate a world that completely misinterprets your very existence.
And this frustration totally boils over when a swan spots him in the water, deciding he isn't a person at all, but rather the perfect twig to weave into its nest. Stickman cries out, "I'm not a twig. Why can't they see? I'm Stickman. I'm Stickman. That's me." It's this passionate, desperate assertion of self in a world that constantly tries to use him as a mere object. It really highlights the sheer resilience you need to maintain your identity when your physical form is constantly working against you.
Okay, on to Section 3. Zog's quest for a star. Madame Dragon's school.
So, Madame Dragon ran this school specifically designed to teach young dragons all the things they fundamentally need to know. And the curriculum is tough. In year 1, all the dragons are tasked with learning how to fly high, way up in the sky. But the formal instruction, well, that's really only the beginning. Madame Dragon tells them that once they're shown the basics, they have to practice on their own. They must practice flying fast and free so that by the time they're fully grown, they'll be absolute expert flyers.
Which builds perfectly into the personal drive of our next character, Zog. Now, interestingly, Zog is the biggest dragon in the school, but his size isn't actually what sets him apart. It's his absolutely unparalleled work ethic. The source material specifies he was the keenest dragon in his class by far. He tried his absolute hardest every single day, with one singular driving motivation: to win a golden star. He takes that directive to practice flying fast and free incredibly seriously, showcasing how even the largest creatures have to rely on relentless dedication to achieve true mastery.
Next up, Section 4. A cunning plan for Superworm, the garden rescue. Here, the threat is terrifyingly clear. A crow flaps through the night, causing everyone down below to look up in sheer fright. Perched up in an oak tree, the crow lets out this dreadful croak with a really chilling assessment of our hero. The crow views Superworm as nothing more than a special treat to eat, literally singing, "He'll be juicy, fat, and firm, hip hooray for Superworm." It is a stark, kinda brutal reminder of the harsh realities of the food chain, where your local hero is suddenly reduced to nothing more than a juicy meal.
So the crucial point here is how the community responds to this absolutely overwhelming threat. They don't panic. Actually, they organize. The garden creatures instantly commit to helping, collaboratively hatching what they call a cunning plan. They execute this daring strategy by leaving their home carrying a honeycomb. And much like the snail and the whale, this just perfectly shows the power of collective, coordinated action. A bunch of tiny garden bugs obviously can't fight a crow one-on-one, but through strategic planning and the clever use of tools, they can completely orchestrate a daring rescue.
Finally, we reach Section 5, the Big Bad Mouse Shadow, Brains Over Brawn.
We start this one with a predator, the Gruffalo's child, who is out hunting for a midnight feast. But when she finally flushes out her prey, she's severely disappointed. Out of his house comes something not big, not bad, but a mouse. The predator looks at this tiny little rodent and smugly concludes that, well, at least he'll taste good. The physical mismatch here is absolute. The mouse is entirely, completely outclassed when it comes to size and strength.
But check this out. The mouse doesn't run. Instead, he employs an immediate and absolutely brilliant stall tactic. He tells the predator to wait. He confidently asserts that before he gets eaten, he has a friend that the predator really ought to meet. So the mouse asks to hop onto a hazel twig to beckon this supposedly bad and big friend. It is a massive psychological bluff, totally pivoting the predator's attention away from an easy meal and toward this unknown, blooming threat.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the stark contrast between reality and illusion, a contrast the mouse masterfully manipulates. The reality is, it's just a tiny, defenseless mouse sitting in a hazel tree. But the mouse waits for the exact perfect environmental condition. Out comes the moon, bright and round. And by positioning himself just right, the mouse casts a terrible, gigantic shadow that falls right onto the ground. He literally uses the environment to project a completely different, terrifying reality.
And you know what? The psychological manipulation works flawlessly. We see the complete capitulation of the predator as the Gruffalo's child, staring up at this massive shadow, unclenches her fist in sheer fright and whispers, "The big bad mouse, so he does exist?" I mean, wow. The tiny mouse has entirely conquered the much larger predator without throwing a single punch. He relied solely on environmental awareness and brilliant, on-the-fly trickery.
Which brings us to the final thought I really want to leave you with today. Is size actually a measure of power, or is cleverness the true magic? Think about it. From a snail halting a school to save a giant whale, to a tiny mouse casting a monstrous shadow to terrify a predator. These sources remind us over and over that impact is not determined by physical stature. No, it's determined by communication, by community, relentless effort, and sheer brilliant wit. So the next time you feel a little too small to make a difference, just remember the silvery trail and the hazel twig. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what true power really looks like.